This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Anti-Taliban protests in Afghanistan's eastern city of Jalalabad leave at least 3 people dead. We examine why men are more reluctant to get the COVID vaccine in South Africa. And Nigerian musician uses his art to promote peace in the country's restive north central region. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. In Nigeria, annual inflation has fallen for the 4th month in a row thanks to a slowdown in food price increases. And poultry farms in Ghana are taking a hit from an outbreak of avian flu. Some 10,000 birds have died so far of the disease. We'll have an update on containment measures in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you, Rama. We begin this news hour with the latest on the transition of power in Afghanistan. At least 3 people have been killed in anti-Taliban protests in the eastern city of Jalalabad. Witnesses say that more than a dozen people were also injured when fighters opened fire. Residents are reported to have attempted installing Afghanistan's national flag in place of the Taliban's. The group did not immediately comment on that incident. Meanwhile, one of the Taliban's exiled leaders, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, has returned to Afghanistan for the first time in more than 10 years. All this while the evacuation scramble by Western nations continues. Security officials say that about 5,000 people have been evacuated from Kabul so far. The UAE has announced that it is hosting Afghan President Ashraf Ghani on humanitarian grounds. Marilai Abbasin, a freelance journalist in Kabul, has more.
The situation is getting normal at Kabul airport today afternoon. U.S. and NATO forces commander General McKenzie appeared out there at the Kabul airport, and he satisfied everybody there to be calm, and the process will go on normally. Still, there are crowds and rush of a lot of people inside the Kabul airport, and at the same time there are also reports from the U.S. and other embassies that they have already at the end of evacuating their own staff and employees. While Australia at the same time reported that they have got the first flight of their Afghan colleagues to Australia, and it's already landed, and they said they will continue supporting their Afghan friends in Afghanistan in order to evacuate them from Kabul airport. And when it comes to the casualties, there was a massacre, a very panic situation, and the people that suffered is now getting lower. At least 12 people killed and dozen more injured. Now our colleagues at the area were saying, and as we were witnessing all these incidents, the situation is getting under control.
China has pledged support for the peaceful reconstruction of Afghanistan. A foreign ministry spokesperson on Wednesday urged the Taliban to crack down on terrorist forces and not allow them to threaten neighboring countries. The Taliban has declared amnesty across Afghanistan and says it will allow women to join its government. The group insists that it respects the rights of women within the framework of Islamic law. China says it respects the will of the Afghan people. Well, meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged the Taliban to live up to its promises during an emergency debate in Parliament. Johnson said the group must be judged on actions, not words. He also said that Britain had so far secured the safe return of over 300 British nationals. More than 2,000 Afghan nationals have also been taken to the UK as part of a resettlement program. Applications for 2,000 more Afghans are being considered. Priority will be given to those most at risk, including women, children, and others forced to flee the Taliban's advance. Well, for more detail on this, Lucy Hoff joins us now from Brussels. Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us in the program. EU leaders have been seeking a coordinated response in anticipation of an influx of refugees from Afghanistan. What more can you tell us about this, Lucy?
Well, Hannah, there have been fears for some time that the instability and the resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan could lead to scenes akin to that we saw in 2015 and the migration crisis in the wake of the Syrian civil war. And certainly those fears have been mounting in recent days. Greece is saying that it doesn't want to become a gateway for migration into the European Union for citizens fleeing Afghanistan. Germany and France have said that they recognize the moral responsibility to take on vulnerable people looking to flee the country, but there does need to be conditions and there needs to be a coordinated common strategy amongst EU citizens. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is saying that really there had been a failure to develop that common migration strategy in the years since 2015. So there will be up to 10,000 people taken on from Afghanistan into Germany. France again saying that it will take on a number of evacuees, but it hasn't yet specified a number. But really, this is still a very political issue on this continent. There will still be a lot of debate here about what exactly that role should be for EU nations in terms of housing refugees. And certainly the priority for a number of EU states is about working with Afghanistan's neighbours in terms of allowing safe passage for those looking to leave Afghanistan.
Lucy, we've also learned that the U.S. has asked countries like Uganda here in Africa to take in some of the refugees fleeing Afghanistan. Is such an option likely to be considered by the EU?
Yeah, certainly that request from the US to Uganda to take on 2,000 refugees is one that has been watched with interest here in Europe. We know already, as I just was outlining, that the European Union wants to work with Afghanistan's neighbours, particularly Turkey as well as Pakistan, in terms of supporting efforts to host refugees in the short term whilst a longer term strategy is worked out. But of course this is an issue that has been difficult for some time, and certainly the EU's negotiations with Turkey on how to deal with migrants thus far have been tricky and have run into greater difficulties in recent months and in the last 12 months or so. So this is likely to be difficult. We know that there are already issues of capacity in Turkey and Pakistan, that there is a sense that it is inevitable that large numbers of people will be looking to make their way to Europe. So certainly that is a decision that will be watched with interest by the United States, but no sense of the concrete policy from the European Union at the moment.
Thank you so much for all that, Lucy. Lucy Hoff speaking to us from Brussels. We'll turn our attention to news from the African continent now. In Niger, mounting insecurity in many parts of the country continues to raise serious concern. This year alone, hundreds of people have been killed in extremist attacks, while tens of thousands have been forced to flee their homes. Conflict in Niger has been ongoing for about 9 years now. CGTN's Deji Badmos brings us the details on this latest attack.
This is the latest incident in a series of attacks in western Niger in 2021. The gunmen, like in previous attacks, were said to have arrived at the village of Darede on motorbikes, shooting at people working in their fields in what locals have described as a very bloody attack. Of the 37 people killed in the attack, 13 were children, and there's been no claim yet of responsibility for the attack. In March, this same very Darede village came under a bloody attack where suspected jihadists killed about 66 people. So far, the Human Rights Watch says over 420 civilians have been killed in the volatile Tillaberi region and the neighboring region of Tahua this year. Now, the state of affairs in the Tillaberi region, where most of these attacks are occurring, has not made things easy. The region has particularly been very volatile because it's a flashpoint zone where the frontiers of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali converge. Now, due to its terrain, multiple jihadist groups operate in the area, and so it's been difficult for local, regional and international forces to really deal with the situation there. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
In East Africa, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has condemned brutality against civilians and suspects by security agencies in the country. Museveni made the remarks in a televised State of the Nation address on security. Reporting from Uganda's capital, Kampala, here's Isabel Nakiria.
President Museveni criticized security agencies for beating up suspects as a way of persuading them to talk during interrogations. His address follows the recent appearance of suspects in court with what appears to be marks from torture. Mr. Museveni warned that torture is a lazy way of carrying out proper investigations. The president noted that instead the wrong people could confess to crimes they didn't commit, leaving real criminals to walk away free.
All these mistakes, barking at the people, beating people, isolated killings, they are not many, but they should not happen at all.
The Ugandan leader said he had met with his security chiefs and ordered that beatings should stop. He noted that gross misconduct by security personnel portrayed a bad image of the country. Ugandan police have released a statement saying it will continue reviewing its record on the use of excessive force and ensure human rights are respected. In the recent national elections, several civilians were injured and more than 50 people lost their lives following a protest over the arrest of opposition politician Bobi Wine. Campaigners have scoffed at Museveni's changed stance on torture, saying in the past he condoned it.
I would have taken him seriously if he announced punitive actions against his officers that have been abusing human rights in this country. He can still take action.
The U.S. has recently imposed visa restrictions on certain Ugandan officials over their human rights records.
Maybe because of the sanctions that some security officers got after elections, and that was just the beginning of sanctions. Maybe he has sensed that if he does not take a clear stand on human rights abuses that he has been presiding over as a commander-in-chief and president of this country, then maybe more sanctions were coming.
The 2021 World Human Rights Report on Uganda accused security forces of using excessive and unnecessary lethal force against civilians. The report notes that security forces beat, extort, shot, and arrested people for allegedly failing to comply with the government's COVID-19 restrictions. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Time for a short break. More news when we return, including leaders from Southern Africa seek to increase homegrown COVID vaccine production capacity. And we examine why men are more reluctant to get the COVID vaccine in South Africa.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. The Southern African Development Community has concluded its annual Heads of State and Government Summit in Lilongwe, Malawi. It's the 41st such meeting of the 16-member regional grouping. Angela Coppola has more.
The group meets at a crucial point in its history. Its member states are facing numerous challenges.
It is a time for us as a region to rebuild and recapacitate our productive resources. Now is the time for us to fully unleash our people's entrepreneurial capacities. Now is the time for us to set up productive linkages for achieving structural and industrial transformation. Now is the time for us to turn the SADC we want into the SADC we enjoy.
Peace and security in the region remain a growing concern, and SADC's organ on politics, defence and security has been very active in the last 12 months, especially dealing with the situation in northern Mozambique.
The decision made by this summit to have the United Republic of Tanzania host the Regional Counterterrorism Center under the SADC Regional Counterterrorism Strategy and Action Plan is a step in the right direction. That center will be yet another demonstration of our resolve to give no room to terrorism and radicalism and to keep our community peaceful.
The regional bloc has a plan to industrialize member countries, and it's driven by the outgoing Executive Secretary, Dr. Stegomina Lawrence Tax. President Chakwera acknowledged her contribution.
Because you have achieved great milestones during your tenure, including formulating and operationalization of the SADC Industrial Strategy and Roadmap, SADC Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, our ISDP, for 2020-2030, and the SADC Vision 2050, among others.
As the new chair takes up office, the regional bloc is faced with several challenges. First of all, dealing with the economic impact of COVID. Secondly, trying to increase cross-border trade between members. And thirdly, dealing with the insurgents in northern Mozambique. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, health officials there say that men are more reluctant to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Reports indicate that almost 60% of those who have received COVID vaccines so far are women. As of August the 17th, over 9 million vaccines had been administered in South Africa. Reporting from Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Yulisa Njamela.
According to the National Health Department, the discrepancy is a significant one. Of the 7.2 million people in South Africa who have so far received at least one dose of the vaccine, only 40% are men. That means 2.8 million men compared to 4.3 million women in the country have presented themselves for a vaccine. Misinformation, myths and fear are just some of the issues that health experts are saying are the reasons for vaccine hesitancy.
It seems the myths that are circulating around the vaccine are actually overpowering what is factually out there. So it seems there's a need. In fact, we propose that we go aggressive in terms of vaccine education. And as we do that, we need to take into cognizance the various population groupings and differentiated mechanisms of reaching them.
We went out to ask a few men why they are reluctant to be vaccinated.
I feel like we weren't educated enough. I'm afraid that if I do take it, it's going to kind of like mess with my genetic formation. Is the vaccine part of, a population control strategy?
We need to see the long-term effects of this. Before I put it into my body, I need to understand exactly what's going to happen.
I don't think I'll go for vaccine. Something that just came up now, and it's not been tested. Something that we don't know it's going to work.
Vaccine, for me, it seems as if I can, at least if it's tested for a while, maybe for 1 to 2 years from now, I will get vaccinated.
Some health experts, such as Professor Paswana Mafuya, are of the view that to alleviate this situation, perhaps it's time that government implements a more focused way of encouraging vaccination.
We have seen similar type behaviors where people would generally respond more effectively if mechanisms that are appropriate to them are used, their language, their cultural context is taken into consideration. For example, traditionally, women play a more caring role for their families than males, and they tend to be the ones that utilize healthcare services in terms of child care health and sexual reproductive health than their male counterparts. And therefore, they tend to be exposed more to information in various ways, sometimes as they utilize the health facilities than their male counterparts.
Earlier this week, the government announced that there are plans to reach more men. Those plans are due to be unveiled by the end of August. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We're staying with that story, and we're now joined by Dr. Angelique Coetzee, the chairperson of the South African Medical Association. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Dr. Coetzee. We've just heard that report about men appearing to be more reluctant than women in South Africa to be vaccinated. We heard some of the reasons from some of the people that were interviewed in that report, but why do you think that is?
Good evening, and good evening to all your listeners out and viewers out there. You know, I'm coming from a bit of a different perspective, and I'm saying if you look at traditionally, women are the nurturers. So who goes to the doctor? The females. Who takes the children to the doctor? Females. Who take the men when they are sick? Who make their appointments? Females. So that's the one thing. Males are they are the providers. They're not the nurturers. So for men just to make an appointment out of their own to go to to get the vaccine is not really part of how they have been brought up. So you need a female to make the appointment and get them there. That's the one thing. The second thing is, if we look, we have started with the 60s pluses with our vaccines. One guy, and I don't think the stats shows this clearly to us. But again, in South Africa, most of the times it's the females that outlive the men. And therefore, you will see much more females above the age of 60 getting their jab, simply because there are more females than males. And again, if the male are living on his own and his children are not there, there's no one to nurture and make an appointment. He will not do that easily out of its own. It's not that he doesn't want to get the vaccine. It's just not part of his makeup. And I think one needs to look at these type of stats. So again, when you look at the economic age group, that's the age group between 30 up till, again, 55, 60, again, mostly men. And if the vaccines are not coming to their workplace, you are going to find it difficult for men to make, again, out of their own an appointment if they don't have a secretary to do that. So I think it's part of who we are, where we are coming from. It's not because they don't want to take the vaccine. It's just they are the providers and we are the nurturers as female.
Another thing that we had heard of in that report was that term vaccine hesitancy, and I think it has been not just for South Africa, but a global phenomenon. What we have heard is the South African government saying that it will not mandate vaccinations in that country. Can you speak to us about what some of what the authorities are doing in terms of vaccination campaigns there?
There's a lot of vaccination campaigns going out. There's policies around this, where companies need to bring a policy to the table. They had a deadline in July, tell how they are going to make sure that their employees are safe, and what are you going to do as an employer to make sure that your employees gets themselves vaccinated. We also know that some of the big medical schemes or insurance companies like the likes of Discovery are going to give discount or a lower rate for those members who has been vaccinated, as that will bring down their costs regarding hospitalization. And then there's, We have a lot of people like Sama, the media in South Africa. All of us are trying to get as much information out there to the public regarding vaccines. But it's also important to understand that if you want to convey the message, you need to speak the language of the patients. And with that, I mean, you need to understand what is important to them. What are their fears around hesitancy? Why don't they want to take the vaccines? And this is communication. And although we are doing a lot of work around that, I don't think there's enough communication. And I think, you know, with all the past few months that we have seen regarding corruption and all of that in South Africa, I think the trust of the average person out there are not where it's supposed to be. And remember, South Africa struggled. We first had the AstraZeneca, and we were telling people we're going to get AstraZeneca. Then consequently, we found out that we cannot give that against our Beta variant. Then we started with the Sisonke, and then it becomes a trial to be able to vaccinate those healthcare workers. Then we said we're going to bring in Pfizer. We brought in Pfizer, and we said 21 days, and then we realized we don't have enough vaccines, and we went to 42 days. And then we had the problem with Johnson & Johnson, with what happened in America, and unfortunately the batches, 2 of those batches were were received in South Africa. And we started late with the program, and then we had this system where people need to register on the system. Now, let me tell you, South Africans traditionally are not people that go on appointment systems. The average person out there are what we call walk-ins, and that's how they have been brought up, and this is how they do it. So, and again, not everyone had access to electronic devices to get themselves registered on the EVDS system.
Doctor,
and again, difficult.
Doctor, so many of the challenges that you've mentioned there that South Africa went through, and have answered that question quite brilliantly. But some countries like Kenya, for instance, have reportedly gone to the extent of threatening disciplinary action against unvaccinated civil servants. What do you make of such approaches?
Well, still, you know, I think everyone's got a choice, but the choice must be based on good evidence. Factual evidence. We should not get anti-vacciners into the equation here, as that confuses everyone. And at the end of the day, it's your right. You have got a right to decide not to get vaccinated, but I also have a right to say, you're a medical doctor and you have not been vaccinated. Do I want you to examine me because you know, you've got a higher incidence then of maybe spreading the virus to me as a person or to my family? So yes, you've got a right, but other people also have got a right.
Thank you so much for all that, Dr. Angelique Kutsia, chairperson of the South African Medical Association. Well, the coronavirus pandemic has brought a major shift in the way people live and work. Remote working has taken off and has become the reality for millions, especially in a country like South Africa, which had a strong pre-pandemic office culture. According to a study conducted by Old Mutual, more than half of office-based workers remain at home as South Africa's third wave of COVID-19 infections continues. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Sachne Naidu is a seasoned recruitment specialist, usually armed with a plan for any scenario. She wasn't fully prepared when South Africa was forced into a COVID-19 lockdown.
At first it was very frustrating. We were experiencing first wave, we were experiencing lockdown for the first time, very new to that. There are days where I woke up in the morning and I thought, okay, let's just make it through the hour, let's just make it through 2 hours.
Naidu's life went from a jam-packed schedule and face-to-face interaction to isolation and digital meetings.
Previously, if we are experiencing a crisis, we would reach over to our colleague, we would reach over to upper management. And for the past year or two, as you can see, I work alone in this home and I've got my 2 dogs and that's it. It's pure isolation.
Remote working changed the way people are employed and managed.
It was a radical change both in the way we run our business, but a radical change
in terms of the way I deal with my staff. We had to start trusting people, and actually, I think it's worked out brilliantly.
COVID-19 brought waves of illness, death, job losses, anxiety and panic, adding a new dimension for employers.
I try and be as personable with them as I would have been in the office, and I try and do little things for them. Like, we couldn't have a Christmas party, so I made them lasagnas, and I put a Christmas hat on, and I loaded all these lasagnas in the car, and I drove around the whole of PE handing out lasagnas for them.
The question now is whether South Africa's once thriving office culture will return.
Working from home is great, but being out, engaging, learning, absorbing information has changed drastically over the past year or two. I would go back to work in a heartbeat.
There are other people that have been forced to work from home that are in abusive relationships and that kind of thing. That has been horrific for them. Okay, but I haven't experienced that in my company. But I feel that there should be an option, an office option for those people that can always just pop in.
Many of South Africa's office parks and blocks emptied out at the start of lockdown and have remained that way. With the slow pace of vaccinations, it may be a while before they're once again teeming with people. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Turning to North Africa now, the families of over 1,000 Tunisian irregular migrants who were reported missing turned up in protest near the foreign ministry in the capital city, Tunis. The mothers of the young undocumented migrants came from all across the country to demand information about the fate of their missing relatives.
Awatif Daudi lost contact with her son more than a year ago after he boarded a fishing vessel headed to the Italian shores. She claims that many irregular migrants who were on the same boat have shown signs of life. However, her son Hamdi is still missing.
My son is a licensed boat mechanic. He's a fishing vessel crew member. Since July 25, 2020, I have no information about his whereabouts or if he's dead or alive. His friends and crew reached Italy and were arrested in Lampedusa. They were jailed for 2 months with many regular migrants, including minors. They were released, but my son has vanished.
In 2011, Latifa's brother attempted to cross the Mediterranean, but failed to reach the Italian island of Lampedusa. She believes that he's still alive in Libya.
We are sure that our sons and brothers are alive. I watched a video of my brother in jail in Libya and a video of him disembarking at the port. An Italian journalist is willing to testify. I call on the Tunisian president to intervene and to help me bring back my brother and all those who disappeared recently or were reported missing, dead, and even buried.
President Kais Saied visited several ports from which irregular migrants departed this year. The head of state described the smugglers of migrants as dangerous sharks who are responsible for hundreds of deaths during failed irregular migration attempts.
Today and yesterday, traffickers are pushing the poor and the impoverished people into the sea so that they are swallowed by fish. We'll face the real fish on the mainland and the human sharks, who are even worse and deadlier than sea and ocean sharks.
According to the Social Affairs Department, the number of the missing irregular migrants, including women and children, has increased since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in the North African country. The Tunisian Foreign Ministry announced that 57 young Tunisians who were held in a reception center for irregular migrants in Zawiya, Libya, were repatriated on Tuesday. They were arrested while trying to reach the Italian coast. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's now recap on the hour's top stories. At least 3 people have been killed in anti-Taliban protests in Afghanistan's eastern city of Jalalabad. Residents had reportedly tried to install Afghanistan's national flag in place of the Taliban's. Meanwhile, the UAE has announced that it is hosting Afghan President Ashraf Ghani on humanitarian grounds after he fled the country. The Southern African Development Community has held the annual Heads of State and Government Summit in Ilonga, Malawi. Peace and security in the region remain a growing concern, and SADC's organ on politics, defense, and security has been very active in the last 12 months. And Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has condemned brutality against civilians and suspects by security agencies in that country. His rebuke follows a recent appearance of suspects in court with what appears to be marks from torture. Well, those are stories making headlines for this hour. Now to look at what's happening in the world of business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. Headline inflation in Nigeria has fallen for the fourth month in a row thanks to a decline in food price increases. And next to in Ghana, poultry farms are taking a hit from an outbreak of avian flu. Some 10,000 birds have died of the disease.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start the segment in Angola. Banks over there have issued nearly $900 million in credit since last April. That's according to the latest data set from the National Bank of Angola. New lending by commercial banks until the month of July totaled $505 million, up 10% compared to June's figure. Nearly 60% of the lending went to the private sector, went to large firms. Medium-sized ones took up about 38.5% of the fresh credit issued. Angola is Africa's second largest crude oil exporter. Its economy contracted by 5.1% in 2020. That was its worst performance since independence as the COVID-19 pandemic swept around the globe. On to another crude oil exporter. Nigeria's annual inflation dipped for the fourth consecutive month in July, down to 17.38% thanks to a slowdown in food price increases. Now, this comes ahead of Q2 21 data that will be out sometime next week. Food price inflation is a main component of the headline figure. It fell by 80 basis points from the previous month to 21.03% in July, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. But core inflation, which excludes the price of farm produce, that went up by 63 basis points to 13.72%. Economic growth has resumed in Nigeria. It's back into positive territory after the shock from the COVID-19 pandemic, but it still lags far behind the rest of the sub-Saharan African region due to a combination of sky-high food inflation, heightened insecurity, and stalled economic reforms. Poultry farms in Ghana are taking a hit from the outbreak of bird flu. Over 10,000 birds have died from the disease so far, which has been spreading across West Africa since March. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai has this update from Accra.
Emmanuel Abaja started this poultry farm in Accra in December. It was after he lost his job within the tourism industry due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now his business is threatened with an epidemic, the outbreak of bird flu.
We woke up in the morning and we saw that some were dead. Then we realized that some are giving out like a greenish droppings. And after careful watching at them, we saw that some start shaking their heads, and then they start look as if they are struggling. Just within short 2-3 minutes, they are dead.
Ghana recorded the outbreak of the bird flu in July in 3 out of 16 regions in the country. The Ministry of Agriculture says more than 6,000 birds have died naturally, while nearly 5,000 have been killed to stop the spread of the disease. Abaja says he has lost nearly 800 birds.
They just started laying, so I was just going to depend on the eggs to pay my debts, and now all of them are gone. So it's really a big blow for me.
Veterinary officers say the outbreak of the bird flu could affect nearly 600,000 poultry farms in Ghana. Another poultry farmer, Idrisu Amadou, says he has lost 3,500 birds due to the outbreak of the disease.
Everything gone. I'll start from scratch. You understand? That's been the whole problem.
The bird flu has been spreading in West Africa since March. Ghana has banned the import of poultry from Nigeria and Togo to prevent further spread of the disease. Poultry farmers here say the outbreak of the bird flu comes at the worst possible time. They were already struggling to buy feed for their birds due to a hike in prices. The government says it will give incentives to farmers affected by the disease.
We are appealing to farmers that they should be cautious, they should report early, they should allow us to come and do the proper thing, depopulate and disinfect their farms so that we can stop the spread.
Emmanuel Abaja says he is now counting his losses. It will take him a couple of months to bounce back when the bird flu outbreak is declared over. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
On to East Africa now, where a Kenyan-Swedish company is converting traditionally noisy diesel-powered tour vehicles into relatively silent transporters running off the power of the sun. A luxurious eco-lodge in the Masai Mara is one of the beneficiaries of these EVs, and it's procured 3 of them for use on game drives. CGTN's Alexander Majala explores this niche application of EVs in some pretty unforgiving terrain.
In Kenya's Masai Mara National Reserve, a Toyota 4x4 Land Cruiser glides silently past the herd of grazing elephants, then past the pride of lions lying in the grass. The animals are completely unperturbed by the proximity of the vehicle because its diesel engine has been replaced by an electric one. The new engine eliminates the rumbling noise and, just as importantly, reduces the emission of diesel fumes.
If you drive here silently, you will of course get much closer to animals, especially the elephants that we are in now, because there's no vibrations on the ground and there's no the fume that will get a smell from like other cars. So with this, you can get all those things. They are not disturbed in any way.
Mukenya's vehicle was converted by Opibus, a Nairobi-based Kenyan-Swedish company founded in 2017. It is for now the only company in Kenya that converts diesel and petrol-driven safari off-road vehicles into electric ones. Off-road vehicles are a common sight in Masai Mara, renowned for their annual wildebeest migration. But these are the first in the usually carbon-heavy business of safari tours to be entirely powered by electric batteries.
It's like a different car that I'm driving. It takes me like 1 week to not be confused, but because sometimes you just want to change the gears every time. But for this one, it's like it's automatic. You just drive it very smoothly, no noise, no fumes. It's good for the clients, and also it's good for the environment.
The company has so far converted 10 vehicles used in Kenyan game parks, including 3 in the Masai Mara. Opibus has even more plans to change the transportation landscape in the country.
What we envisioned by 2030 is to have all matatus on the road to be electric, as well as utility vehicles. And what we have at the moment also are motorbikes, which are designed, frame and everything here in-house. And we aim to have more boda riders using electric bike or motorbike.
Opibus uses 35% locally made materials with the aim of eventually only using local materials. As well as being more environmentally friendly than diesel engines, the electric motors cut operating costs by half. At the Embo River camp, operations run solely on solar power. The camp says that with all their eco-operations in place, the company saves around $150,000 a year on operational costs. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
With a closed canopy, those would make for some very interesting daily drivers in Nairobi, especially with all the traffic we have here. I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour in Global Business. We'll be heading over to South Africa. There's an interesting green paper out there proposing a mandatory pension system for its citizens, and those proposals are now up for public comment. If adopted, citizens may be required to contribute up to 12% of their earnings to a new government-backed fund. But does it actually make sense? We'll examine that and plenty more at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you. We're looking forward to that, Rama. We'll see you then. Well, let's not take a short break and return. More news, including we'll look at how a musician is using his art to promote peace in Nigeria's restive northern central region.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We go over to the coast of Côte d'Ivoire now, where a young artist is not only fascinated with creating outstanding masterpieces, but is also determined to clean up beaches in his home city of Abidjan. Here's CGTN's Wanja Mugai with the story.
Aristide Kwame regularly comes through the beaches of Abidjan in search of a particular type of trash. He considers this type of waste a treasure. As an environmentalist and an artist, his mission is to collect flip-flops for his artwork.
This is waste that men dumped into the sea, and the sea brings it back to us because she doesn't want it. The environment doesn't want the negative things that man gives away, so the sea brings everything back to us. When I go pick up waste, there are a lot of questions such as, what will you do with all this? Will you sell the flip-flops? I simply respond that I am an artist, and by picking up this waste, I am removing this burden on nature. I am removing something that disturbs the beach because I don't like to see it dirty.
The United Nations statistics show that 13 million tons of plastic waste are dumped into the world oceans every year. The Ivorian commercial capital of Abidjan neighbors some of the most notorious sea polluters in West Africa, just like Accra, Ghana, and Lagos, Nigeria. The 26-year-old Ivorian has set up a workshop. It is here that he gets his creative juices flowing. He shapes the flip-flops into small shapes, faces and letters, then lays them on his canvas. His works address issues like climate change and social inequalities. He celebrates iconic figures like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. Recently, most of his works have been centered on COVID-19. Today, he is working on a portrait of a mother and her child, both wearing masks.
These faces, for me, they represent society. These faces next to each other is humankind, and humankind needs an environment that is pleasant to live in. This work is about COVID-19 because that's what dominates the news these days. As an artist, I consider myself a witness of my time. That's why I produced this work, not only to show that this is a dangerous disease, but also to bring an additional push in the fight against this disease.
His masterpieces have made it to national and international galleries, as well as museums. Local and foreign art lovers adore his creative pieces.
All these flip-flops associated together is our world. I liked this process, this involvement, both environmental and artistic.
Kwame's pieces cost as much as $1,000 US. Conservationists have been advocating for the blue economy, a concept that calls for global citizens to protect life underwater while gainfully exploiting marine resources. Kwame's artistic efforts go a long way in realizing this goal. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Over in Nigeria, a musician has introduced a new genre of music he calls ndenge, which he's using to promote peace in the country's north-central city of Jos. The city has been one of the hotspots of insecurity in Nigeria's troubled northern region. The musician says he is on a mission to encourage citizens to coexist and partner in building the state. Tekema Kende reports from Jos.
60-year-old Dontala treats a live audience to deng music. It's a combination of sounds from different African musical instruments played by ethnic groups in Jos.
So if instruments can come together, why not human beings? And that's why we want to use the sound of ndeng to unite people. It is said today that peace is everybody's business. And if my business is music, I want to use music to achieve peace. So how do I achieve peace with music? It is not the music that bothers us too much, but that we will get the youths from whatever creeks they are to come, and then we share our message of peace and harmony.
Jos City has witnessed a series of crises in the last 20 years, and efforts by the government to bring about lasting peace haven't been successful. Dontala and his team are trying to help. They are creating more deng singers. They give them local musical instruments so they can take the message of peace to their communities.
It is really enjoyable. All the tribes to come together under the Dontala groups. In fact, I even lack word to express myself today. Because of how excitement I am today.
We've been given 2 trumpets, a flute, drums and other instruments, and advised to take the message of peace through ndeng music to our communities.
Dontala and his team hope to reach ever wider audiences.
And those in the audience here say the message of deng music is powerful.
Deng music is an amazing music. It's so powerful, it's so real, it's so touching.
The state government in June this year donated 50 patrol vehicles and 200 motorcycles to security agencies to strengthen peace and security in the state. In the meantime, Dontala and his team say they will continue to play their part in complementing the government's efforts for a more peaceful state. Tassim Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
It's sport news coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. The World Athletics Under-20 Junior Championship